Welcome, everybody, to Politics in Perspective. I'm Tom Del Beccaro. We have a great show today, at least in my world, because we have the great Dr. Arthur Laffer, who will be our special guest to talk about all things economics, including the big, beautiful bill and its fate. He'll talk about tariffs and what he thinks Trump is really up to, and I think you're going to like it. It's an important interview, in my view, because we're at this juncture where the United States growth has slowed. We have so much government, so much spending. We have those who want to raise taxes. We have those who continue to want to spend, those who deny the effects of tax increases, on and on and on and on. So this interview, I think you'll enjoy it a lot, because it gives the clarity from Dr. Laffer, who was, of course, the legendary economist for Reagan, who held the day and had the tax reductions during the 1980s that were so effective and lasted. The value of that lasted for decades. And he, of course, has been the conservatives' economist for a long period of time. We also should talk briefly before that interview on what happened in California over the last week. You know, California is arguably the best real estate in the world. It has an amazing coastline. It has all these natural resources, limitless beauty. You could spend your whole life hiking California and not see it. But there are many great aspects of it. Yet it is, as President Trump has said, run by someone who's incredibly incompetent, who shouldn't be governor. I had to laugh when they asked Trump what the crime was for Gavin Newsom. The answer, of course, was that he ran for governor, because he really has run that state aground. And we also live in this world where the Democrats seem to be obsessed with just being the party of protest and against something, and they can't bring themselves to realize that Americans want law and order. Yes, they understand that you have to be able to say no to power and this and that. But what we saw in protesting around the country from the 2020 and now again is an element that is just on the verge of anarchy. They get paid. There was a Craigslist advertisement for protesters to come to LA. Excuse me. And that's a reality today. And this dynamic where the Democrat Party of today cannot call that out as being wrong, as Fetterman says and others on the left, where the party operatives cannot come out and say that that is the wrong thing, could well be, it's defining today. It's part of the reason the Democrats are at 21% or worse in approval ratings, but it could well be the defining thing for 2026 if they can't get away from that. Now, look, Trump acted. According to Trump, he is sending a message: don't try this again anywhere else in the country. We'll have to see if, in fact, they do that sort of thing. If they do, regardless of what the Republicans do, that could be defining alone for the Democrats going forward. I also want to briefly mention before we get to our interview that somehow I got on AOC's fundraising list. Now, I think this is amazing. Part of me wants to give her money so that she'll make me an insider. I don't know if she has that program, but so I get more of really to see what's going on. I enjoyed reading it to understand what the other side thinks. Couple of things. Number one, I continue to say that you can make the argument that AOC is the best email list in the country. The best. Her fundraising prowess is remarkable, and Republicans need to accept that. I always smile when every once in a while they sit there and say, oh, we're going to run someone against her. Well, okay, maybe, but don't think she won't have the money to go against it. But also in the list, the email I received, she calls herself a Democrat socialist. She's willing to use the word. Now, doesn't that mean it's over for her? I don't know. How many of you had, I've said this on the show before, how many of you had, the leading spokesperson for the Democrats in 2025 would be AOC? She is. She goes around the country. They can't control her. Her crowds are pretty damn big. She's raising all the money. So anyway, that's where the Democrats are. They're in AOC land, and they're the party of protest. And the party of protest doesn't win. The party that solves problems wins, not the party of protest. That's enough for my opening argument today. But let's get to a longtime friend of mine, a great thinker, and an important American. We'll be back with the interview with Dr. Arthur Laffer. Thanks for watching. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I'm thrilled to have this special interview with one of the greatest teachers in American history, but certainly one of the most important economists of any century, and certainly ours. I'd like to welcome Dr. Arthur Laffer to the show. Dr. Laffer, how are you?
I'm very well, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming on at this important moment.
My pleasure.
I want to start out with some very basic stuff. I know I have some limited time with you, but I have sort of these pet peeves about the economists of the world today, excluding you. I mean, we can draw a direct line from Adam Smith to Milton Friedman to you. So, by the way, you need to live another 100 years, given that time.
Don't worry, I'm planning on it.
Good. All right. So, you, of course, had the legendary Laffer curve. Maybe you could just give us a brief moment in time about how that came about and what was the purpose of that.
Yeah, well, the purpose is in microeconomics. Everyone knows that you can price a product too high and lose money. You can price a product too low and lose money. There's a proper price in there where you maximize your profit. Everyone understands it in microeconomics. They just didn't apply it to macroeconomics. And when you look at it, there are two effects taxes have on revenues. One is the obvious effect. If you raise a tax rate, you collect more revenue per dollar of tax base. That you do. But there's another effect there called the economic effect, which if you raise the tax rate on an activity, you'll get less of that activity, and you'll reduce the size of the tax base. And these two effects, the arithmetic effect and the economic effect, always work in the opposite direction. And by way of illustration, you can say that if 100% tax rates, you'd collect 100% of everything everyone earned, but no one will earn anything, so you get zero revenues. And at zero tax rates, you collect zero of everything everyone earns. They'll earn a lot, but you'll still get zero. And that's the two endpoints. And then if you start lowering the rate from the 100%, you'll get some people starting to work and revenues will go up. And then at some point, they'll start to go back down to zero again at a zero tax rate. That's all it is. It's a pedagogic device, Tom, that allows people to see these two effects vividly in how tax rates affect revenues. Sometimes when you raise tax rates, you collect more revenues. That's true. And sometimes when you raise tax rates, you collect less revenues. It depends on whether you're in the normal range or in the prohibitive range. And unfortunately for liberals, high tax rates are almost always in the prohibitive range. You raise tax rates on the rich and you get less money almost every damn time. So that's the way it is, and that's the way it's always going to be. They're smarter than we are. They have more money than we do, and they know people to buy off and get lawyers, accountants, deferred income specialists, all of that stuff, and they do it. They love their income just like all the rest of us.
So what's important to me about this is, and of course, you have taken on the moniker along with Steve Forbes and Larry Kudlow and Steve Moore as, quote, supply siders. And one of my pet peeves is as if that's some weird branch of economics over here. But isn't economics just the study of human behavior? And supply side economics really just takes into account the law of demand and the basics of economics. It's not something
Yeah, it does.
particularly special.
And you're so right. And let me just, if I can, give you an illustration. I mean, this was Reagan. I think it was 1982, something like that, 81, 82 in there. And we were in the Roosevelt room. Marty Feldstein and a group of others were there. And the president comes over to me and says, Arthur, I just was talking to Marty Feldstein, and he thinks we should get rid of the third year of the tax cut. And I said, sir, I'm not surprised. That's Marty's position. He wants to raise taxes all the time. And I'm not surprised. He said, well, let me give you his argument. And I said, sure, please. He said if we get rid of the third year tax cut, that means that the deficit will be less than it otherwise would have been. That means there'll be less government crowding out in the capital market. This means there'll be more funds available for the private sector. That means interest rates will fall. With interest rates falling, there'll be more new housing starts. There'll be a lower threshold for investment with more new housing starts, more investment. That'll spur the economy, and we'll have an increase in output, employment, and production if we get rid of the third year of the tax cut. And so I nodded and said, yep, I got the logic. He said, do you have an answer? And I said, well, yeah, I do, sir. Let me just see if I can reword Marty's answer to you. What Marty is telling you, Mr. President, is that if you raise taxes on workers and producers, you're going to get more workers and producers. Did I get that right, sir? He said, thank you, and walked. And this is the type of garbage you have to deal with all of your life. I had to deal with Stockman. I had to deal with Marty Feldstein. I had to deal with all the others at that time. And thank goodness Marty, in his final words, I mean, I don't know if you see Bowmaker's book, When the President Calls, but he was very kind to me in his final book. He said, I was wrong, Arthur was right. But it's a little late. It is a little late. And you look at it today and you see the same type of nonsense being done by these people. They think that if you take money from one group and give it to another group, you're going to stimulate the economy. How in the hell they come up with that, Tom, is beyond me, but it ain't logic.
I agree. And on the issue of tax cuts, which you have championed, and Milton Friedman said he was in favor of any tax cut at any time, right?
But see, I'm not that way.
Go ahead.
I'm not that way. Milton Friedman wanted to starve the beast. That was Milton Friedman. Do any tax cut at any time, give them less money and squeeze them down and starve the beast. I'm not that way at all. I mean, I like to see lower tax rates, and I still like to see the government balance its budget at the same time. And in many of the tax cuts, you can do that. You actually cut tax rates like we did under Reagan, like we did under Trump. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act cut tax rates on corporations and income and all of that, and revenues went up. They didn't go down. In the 2 years of that tax bill, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, from the fourth quarter of 2017 through the third quarter of 2019, that 2-year period, total federal tax revenues were much higher than they had been the prior 2 years, and more than the prior 2 years were than the 2 years prior to that. It clearly raised revenues. Now, it didn't raise it in the corporate tax rate itself, but all the other effects were there and made it. And by 3 years later, corporate tax revenues were way up. So, these tax cuts paid for themselves instantaneously, period. And it's just facts. And I don't care who you are. Facts is facts.
And by restoring incentives, or creating ever larger incentives, is a way to expand the economy. The leftists,
and to get rid of the incentives to shelter your income. You want people at a low enough tax rate, people will fire all their lawyers, their accountants, their deferred income specialists. They'll do all that, and they'll pay their taxes fair and square and won't worry about the tax stuff. That's how you collect the revenues. A lot of this is driven by tax sheltering and the use of tax lawyers and tax accountants. How many politicians can you hire? I mean, the new run is that the new legislation is, Tom, I don't know if you're aware of it, but every congressman and senator in the United States is going to be required to wear a barcode so every lobbyist can tell how much each one costs. And, that's what it is.
Fair enough. One way I explain the incentives of tax cuts is I talk about Macy's. The company Macy's has trained Americans not to show up on Monday or Tuesday, but when they lower the prices on Friday, somehow their revenues go up. And I tell
Yep.
people, if you plan a good tax cut, you put the economy on sale and people change their behaviors. In the case of Macy's, they'll change their behavior to sell to save $15. So why, when you cut the top rate down like Kennedy did, and of course Harding Coolidge, why wouldn't the there be a big change in incentives when you bring that marginal rate down?
There is. And when Kennedy did it, he brought the marginal rate down. When Reagan did it, when Harding and Coolidge did it, all of those showed huge increases in tax revenues coming from the top 1% of income earners. It's a huge surge. It was discount Dale at the tax shop, and they all went and paid their taxes fair and square when they cut the rates. Now, what happened when we raised the highest tax rates on income earners under Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter? Catastrophe. I mean, it's just very simple. And that's the way it works. You're completely right. And people would, I mean, how much does it take if you dropped $100 bill on the floor of Grand Central Station? How long do you think it would take someone to pick it up?
Not
People
very.
respond to incentives, even liberals. They're all in crimes of corruption because they want the money. They don't want the taxpayer to keep their money. But oh God, do they get their favorite projects funded and built and their 501c3s? What was that lady's name from Georgia that got $2 billion from Biden?
Yeah,
You, you know
Stacey
her name.
Abrams.
Stacey Abrams. There you go. Congratulations, Stacey. She's just as greedy as anyone ever was.
It's funny you use that statement about the $100 falling down, because in the olden days when I would talk about Carter and member Ford's $50 rebate, I said if you find a $50 bill one time, you probably won't spend it. You probably, maybe you have to, but if you were promised you'd find that $50 every day, you'd have a much different outlook. And isn't that what lowering rates is really about?
Well, in some sense, yes, it is. What you want to do is lower rates on the margin so that your trade-off between labor and leisure is tilted more towards working rather than more towards leisure. You know, at 100% market marginal tax rate, let's say you paid no taxes up to $100,000, and then once you hit $100,000, every additional dollar you earned, you had to pay $150, $1.50, so that you lost money. How many people would earn above $100,000? No one. Now cut that $100,000 rate down, and all of a sudden people will start working as well there. It's just pure incentives on the margin. That's the key.
It's Sweden. Didn't Sweden, who was the famous tennis player who left Sweden, who was doing so well because they had 103% marginal rate? And he
The
said, "What?"
Beatles, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, they all did it. You remember when they wrote the Tax Man? The Beatles did. That was they moved their things to New York. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. The Rolling Stones went to France and did those records in France. And for
Absolutely. Okay,
Britain,
so
no taxes.
yeah, exactly. Let's talk with something very important, which I think people don't understand, including the CBO, and that is the importance of growth. Uh, we have in the 50s, we had on average 4 or 5% growth. We are down to the last 15 years around 2%. That's a massive difference. And you can't, not only can we not afford the welfare state they have built, but you, Larry, and Steve all say how important growth is, not only to balancing the budget, but to society as a whole. Can you comment about that?
Yeah, let me just go back to sort of my modest youth, not real youth, but early adulthood with John F. Kennedy. You know, what Kennedy said was so good, I thought, and it's still so applicable, is the best form of welfare, Tom, is still a good, high-paying job. And what you need to do is you need to get people off welfare and into jobs. And that's what you really need to do and get that going. And, you know, Kennedy was so correct on that. He cut tax rates dramatically, created the economic growth, the go-go 60s, and really increased employment dramatically. Reagan did the same thing. And that's the way we need to get prosperity back into the lower echelons of the economic ladder. And these people deserve the free enterprise prosperity that all the rest of us has so wonderfully achieved. Is, you know, in the inner cities, you've got all of these hugely high tax rates, in part because of tax rates, but also in part of the withdrawal of welfare when you earn more. And those tax rates can exceed 100%. It's just shocking. And we've deprived them from the opportunity of making the money that we were able to make. So I think the dream is to bring economics back into the inner cities, back into the lowest echelons of the economic ladder, to let them enjoy the prosperity that we have had all our lives. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, we both of us are in California. We both did the same thing. We ran for U.S. Senate from California, if you remember that.
Yeah,
You
but I got less votes than the adult members of my family.
Well, I got 8 votes because my mom's had a lot of close friends. Uh, California, though, wants to defy economics. They once again raised the minimum wage, and lo and behold, there's more kiosks and 30,000, I think 30,000 lost jobs.
Yeah.
Why did these politicians learn nothing? Is it just social justice for them?
What they're really doing is lowering the minimum wage to zero because no one wants to hire them. I said something I probably shouldn't have said, but I didn't mean it in this way. Is, you know, in the inner city at $25 an hour or whatever the number is in California, it's a very high number. I mean, these kids aren't just, they're not worth that amount of money. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about their intrinsic worth as a human being. All I'm saying is that at that wage rate, there's no one willing to hire them. And so they'll have no job and they'll earn nothing and they'll be on welfare instead. And that's not a good answer. A good answer is they need to get the requisite skills to be able to earn above the minimum wage on their own. And raising the minimum wage is a guaranteed way of precluding them from ever becoming productive members of society.
If we can, let's shift to the big beautiful bill. I'm not sure that's the right moniker for it. Who was the politician who's Elon Musk said no big bill can be beautiful. We like smaller bills. But before we get into the depths of that, you know, the CBO, dynamic scoring. It seems to me that they only take into account what's in the bill and not take into account what the Reagans of the world did with deregulation, what Trump does with deregulation, to set the table to allow people to succeed. And that's where the additional revenue really comes in. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you know, the CBO is using an accounting definition of revenue that if you cut a tax rate, you're going to lose that amount of revenue on the old income level. You're just going to lose it. And you got to get a spending reduction or a tax rate increase somewhere else. And they do miss the whole dynamics of it. Now, understanding the dynamics, Tom, is really difficult. I don't know of any governor or any legislator who really understands it. I get letters all the time by good people that you and I would like very much, and they think a tax credit is a tax cut. They think an increasing an exemption is a tax cut. It's not. They have no dynamic effects. In fact, negative dynamic effects. The only thing that really, really matters is reducing marginal tax rates. That's the killer. Now, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we reduced the corporate rate, I think, from 34 to 21%. We reduced the personal income tax rate from 39.6 to 37. We had 100% expensing of capital purchases, which is reducing the corporate rate in addition to what it had been. So those are all marginal rates. Now, Obama did a lot of tax cuts too, but none of them were marginal, and all of them added to the deficit. And you just have people that just don't understand what it means to be on the margin and making marginal decisions. And, you know, I don't think you're ever going to educate them. You just have to live with this and just not use those pay-go rules.
There you go. Okay, so what should we be thinking about this bill? I mean, I listen on when I'm on TV, I say, it's even going to be worse if you have the deficit's going to be worse with the tax increase
It will
than
be.
with this bill.
Yeah, it will be.
Could you give us thoughts
And
on that?
yeah, well, given that this bill uh, re, increased tax revenues, which I mentioned to you before, from the fourth quarter of 2017 through the third quarter of 2019, federal revenues went up, not down, and they went up by more than they had in the prior 2 years from the 2 years prior to that. So it was a surge in revenues, and if you reverse that, duh, revenues are going to go down. That's going to happen. So this bill, what this bill does is just locks into law, at least for another 10 years, almost all of the tax cuts. Now, the corporate tax rate reduction is already permanent. So this does the personal income tax, it does the 100% expensing, it does a really big one, which is the death tax. That's really important. And there are a few other things it does as well. But this bill just means that we're not going to have a big tax increase come January 1st, 2006. And I think that's something really worthwhile to make sure we don't have that tax increase.
The other half of the bill, of course, is all the spending. We are spending at what all our governments combined, some 35% of the US economy relates to spending. Uh, Musk says there should, and Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, they want less spending. I want less spending as a percentage of the economy. Where do you come out in the spending in this bill? What would you prefer to see?
Yeah, I totally agree that we should have less spending. The question is, would I hold this bill, sacrifice it for the spending cuts? No. We need to make sure that tax thing, and then we need to focus on spending. The problem with spending, Tom, is very simple. The people who vote for more spending do not bear the consequences of their actions. They just don't. And so, how do you get them to be able to understand this on a personal level? And my view is very simply, is I think we should put all politicians on commission. If the economy grows at 3%, you get your pay. If it grows at 4%, you get double your pay. If it grows at 5%, you get triple your pay. If it grows at 2%, you don't get any pay. If it grows at 1%, you owe us the money you would have been paid at 3%. And once they get to feel the pain of their own actions, they will behave in a very different way. The problem with government is there are no incentives to do the right thing, none. And that's the real problem. Teachers who teach well should be paid more, Tom, than teachers who don't teach well. And everyone knows who the good teachers are. Every student does, every teacher does, every school administrator does. Yet we don't do it. In fact, it's against the law to do that. And I could go on and on in these examples, but you need to instill in government the incentive structure, and it starts at the very top with elected officials. If the economy's in a recession, you don't get your pay this year. If the economy's in a boom, you get double your pay, or you get some sort of incentive with regard to the S&P 500. You want to keep it simple, but you want to make sure politicians monetarily benefit from a good economy and monetarily lose from a bad economy. You've got to put that into the structure. And I was hoping that some stage I could see Elon Musk and his Doge people do that, but I didn't see it, to be honest with you. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't doing a good job. They found a lot of waste, abuse, and fraud. But to solve that, you've got to instill incentives into the bureaucracy. And once you do that, you don't have to worry about them anymore. You've got the incentives in
Okay, I
there.
like it. I like it. Now let's move to tariffs.
Sure.
Uh, Tariffs are not favored among people like you, me, a lot of people over time. But Trump seems to want to use this as, is it a leverage point? Is it because he really thinks we could go back to the 1800s when federal spending was what, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% of the economy, not 35 today? What should people, seriously, Art, one of the times you and I were at one of the dinners, I came up and put my arm around you and I said, we need you for a long time. And there's not enough people who speak clearly on these subjects. Education. Voltaire said the problem with education is people keep getting older. Just when we've taught them something, they die, and we have to start over again. So, what should people be thinking about tariffs at this moment in time and how they're being used?
Well, let me start off with the first thing that you said. You listen to Trump and you sit there and say he loves or whatever. Don't ever judge a person by his words. Judge them by his deeds. Trump had 5 tariff bills in his first term. He had the USMCA, which lowered tariffs. He had the Japan deal, which lowered tariffs. He had the South Korean deal, which lowered tariffs. He had the Brazilian deal, which lowered tariffs, and he had the Colombian deal, which lowered tariffs. What he says is he threatens people with higher tariffs and then brings them to the negotiation table and negotiates lower tariffs with them. At the G7 meeting in his first term in Ottawa, he had to leave early to go to Singapore to meet with Kim Jong-un. Now, this is widely recorded thing. He had to apologize to the other 6 because he had to leave it a little early. He said, but you don't like nuclear war, neither do I. I need to go early. But let me just say, before I leave, I'm willing to make a deal with all the 6 of you. The U.S. is prepared to get rid of all tariffs, all quotas, and all non-tariff barriers if you guys are. And they all looked up at the ceiling and went, ooh. Donald Trump is a free trader all the way, and all of these negotiations, in my opinion, are to get lower tariffs, lower quotas, and lower non-tariff barriers, that he is the free trader of all free traders. He wants to get it done, not just talk about it. He threatens tariffs in order to get lower trade barriers. And that's my view of Trump, and I'm sticking with it until proven wrong.
Okay, good. Let's talk about the deregulatory effort going on in the United States today. By some counts, the federal regulations, what, 2.3, something like that, cost us a year, $1 trillion. Who knows among the states? What, how important is that aspect of it? And what would you say if you were counseling someone? What would you say to do overnight?
Well, first of all, I love the Chevron decision by the Supreme Court, which rolled back the authority of departments and agencies to independently increase regulations, whatever it is, without explicit legislative authority to do so. And I think that's been a huge, huge, huge plus. And I laud the Supreme Court for that. With regard to regulations, restrictions, requirements, and all of this stuff, what I would do is I would make sure that all of these had a sunset provision, a not too long sunset provision, and would be required to reevaluate those regulations, restrictions, to make sure that they're still achieving the single purpose at hand and not causing a lot of collateral damage. I think that would save us a lot of trouble. And when you look at these regulations, restrictions, and requirements, we need a lot of them, Tom. I mean, we really do. You can't wake up one morning and decide to drive on the left-hand side of the road and the next morning drive on the right-hand side. Well, I changed my mind. No, you need rules, regulations, et cetera, speed limits and all that sort of stuff, but you need them to be reviewed. And you need them to have a sunset provision so that regulations that go in that do cause a lot of collateral damage that was unexpected. No one wants to hurt the economy, but it was unexpected. And it comes in, you get a quick chance to review it and change it. That's what I'd love to see happening. I mean, this is what happened with energy deregulation. When Reagan came in, the price of oil went from, I forget what it was, $32 a barrel down to $8 a barrel because of deregulation. We had all this new. That's the type of evidence you need to say, stop regulating energy. And I think Trump, it worked very well in his first term. We became energy independent. And now Biden took us back. Well, Trump's deregulating again. It's going to do a great job. And look at the price of oil already. Those are the types of things I'd like to see, that you have continuous and constant review because of sunset provisions on all these regulations. And that's the way I'd like to see it done, rather than some rule of 10 reductions for every one regulation you put in. That's a good gimmick thing type of thing, but I really want to make sure they all have sunset provisions very quickly, like every 5 years. All these major regulations have to be reviewed and re-legislated.
I like it. Okay, Social Security and Medicare. I say one of the biggest
Be
threats
careful,
to both
Tom.
of
Be
those.
careful. Remember how old I am. You watch your step, young man. Okay, go ahead.
I say the biggest threats to those programs is 2% growth instead of 4% growth. What it,
I
any
think the
comment
real
on that?
problem with those programs is they are not recognizing the realities of life expectancy. I'm 85 and I'm still working full time every day in the office, traveling all over everywhere. I love it. My dad, who was a major CEO and executive of a big company, I come from a privileged background and a big company, and he retired at 65, and he needed to retire at 65. He was old. I'm much younger than he was, and I'm 85 and he was 65. And that's just the nature of the advancement of healthcare in this country. And we should let that healthcare change be reflected in Social Security. Now, under Reagan, we did. We extended the age of retirement from 65 to 67, which reduced the unfunded liabilities of Social Security dramatically. If we extended the age of retirement when you receive Social Security benefits to 70 or 71 years old, there would be no unfunded liability of Social Security. You wouldn't need millions of young people coming in from other countries to do stuff. You just have recognized the actuarial life expectancy. Now, the best of all would be have private retirement accounts. Private retirement account. That's the best of all, where you have an exact one-to-one relationship. What you put in is what you get out personally. So if I put $1 into my privatized savings account, I get the expected value of $1 at some time in the future, the discounted present value. And that's the way it should be. But in the absence of that, just extend the age of retirement. In fact, maybe even extend it a little too far and cut the payroll tax a little bit more. I'd love to see the payroll tax come down 2 or 3 percentage points and have people extend their retirement out to maybe 72 or 73. And that really is, I mean, I look at a lot of my friends, a lot of them are dead, obviously, but a lot of them are still functioning really well and working full time. That was not the case 50 years ago. It just wasn't. And, it's in some cases, like in the case of Joe Biden, you do need to have them retire early. He's not capable. I'm 3 years older than Biden, and I'm 20 times more effective than Biden was. And it's sad, but it has nothing to do with his intrinsic quality as a human being. He just aged differently than I do. And most people these days age a lot better than they did 50 years ago. Biden didn't.
All right, so I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Milton Friedman when I had lunch with him one day. I told him that his books were a great inspiration to me and spurred me on. And then I asked him, whose books did you read that had that inspiration? And I stumped him. So now I'm going to ask you, what was your motivation when you were young along these lines? I'd love to know.
Yeah, I did like Milton Friedman very much. I disagree with a lot of what he did, but I think he was a wonderful man and a great inspiration. And I think his errors, like the negative income tax and like floating exchange rates, forced me to really think and advance my own thoughts to fixed exchange rates. There should be no minimum, minimum wage, minimum tax type of thing. All of those things there. But my inspiration really was Bob Mundell. Bob Mundell, as a young economist, was my idol, my hold up, and my example. And I still will argue that Bob Mundell is the single best economist in the last century, century and a half. I mean, he's just an amazing person, and he was so helpful and so supportive to me. And if you look at where his students went, amazing job he did. But Milton Friedman was a great inspiration. Some of the others had great reputations, but they were crappy economists. Milton Friedman was not a crappy economist. He was wrong on a lot of things, but he was a great inspiration. And I liked him very much personally. He and I got along awfully well together. And we didn't only share shortness, we shared a lot of views of world. I'm not a believer like a lot of people are in freedom as an independent quality. I'm really into economics. If collectivist economics did a better job, I would be a collectivist economist. The point is that collectivist economics doesn't work. It's not that it's collectivist, it just doesn't work. One person in the government can't come near to the competence of a crowd, of a group of people buying and selling in marketplaces. We need competition, most of all amongst governments. And that's why I'm a firm opponent of the EU. I think all those countries should break up and start competing again with each other. I said that I did the keynote when the EU met in Bratislava, Slovakia. What was it, 8, 10 years ago? I was the keynote speaker, and I argued that the competitive model is beautiful. It's the golden. I mean, the Adam Smith. All many competitors, many workers, many products. That sort of the golden age of pure competition is true. But most of all, it's true for governments. And governments need competition more than anything. And anytime two governments agree on something, it means they found another way of exploiting the electorate. And I think the smaller governments are, the better off they are. And that's where I come down on it. So
And think about the history of Italy when they were city states and how vibrant they were. But once the two times that they've been crammed into one thing, and government had a heavy hand, it's practically the growth has
the
disappeared
US
over
states
time.
themselves, all 50 of our states are really a cauldron of experimentation, where these states, you
Should
can see which ones are succeeding and which ones are losing. If you didn't have the state system, we would have the worst country in the world. We'd be worse than Ethiopia, for God's sakes. We'd be the grunge of the grunges. It's our state model that allows us to compete on economics, minimum wage, death tax, income tax, all these things. Beautiful competition there that creates real prosperity. And you can find out which policies work and which ones don't. Now, if you don't like your state, get the hell out of there, and they all come to Tennessee. That's why I'm here.
Okay, I got to wrap up. I got to show a couple of pictures of you. If
Uh-oh.
my producer can put it up, put up the one where I'm over his shoulder first. I don't
Oh
know
my
if you can
God, there
see
we
this,
are.
Doctor.
Would you send me a copy of that, please?
I want you to know how I love it. First of all, this is in the 21 Club. I don't know if you remember that. I'm not sure the event, but you were kind enough to
Was
sign
it before my first old fashioned or not?
You are an old fashioned. And the next
Yes, I
one,
am.
I really have to thank you, relates to, if we can pull it up.
Now, do you know what that's
There it
napkin?
is.
Did you see what was on that? What that napkin said? It said "Vis medicatrix
Let's go back to
naturae."
it.
There it is. That means
Yes.
the power of nature. Deregulation, and you'll get better results. There are two medical
Uh,
ones: primum non nocere, which means first of all, do no harm, and second of all, vis medicatrix naturae, get the alien things out of the system, and nature will take care of the thing by itself. It's the free market duo. Okay, next
I
picture.
love it. And
Sorry.
if go ahead. And your next one, I especially have to thank you for, because this is your quote about my book. And I was really touched by what the praise you gave me here in with regard to my book. So I just wanted to thank you. This is, of course, a picture of you when you were getting your medal from President Trump, is it not?
It does look like that. Yes, it does.
So there you
Yeah, it
go.
does. Well, if you could
All
send me
right.
those two pictures, I'd love it, Tom. And you're doing a yeoman's work here, by the way. You really are doing a great job. And we need a lot more Tom Del Beccaros there.
I appreciate it. Doctor, thanks for taking the time today. I look forward to interviewing you in 35 years exactly when your predictions, more of your predictions come true.
Well, I hope you live that long. I really am hoping for your health, because I would hate to have someone else do that interview 35 years from now. So keep up the good, healthy life, because I ain't going nowhere. Not so soon.
All right. Thanks so very
Talk
much.
to you
And
later.
we'll be right back with
Thank you,
Politics in
sir.
Perspective. Welcome back, everyone. Tom Del Becaro, Politics in Perspective. I hope you enjoyed the mind that is Dr. Arthur Laffer. He's a joy to listen to for me. In the times that we've sat together, he is incredibly funny, but an incredibly active mind, and he has a lot of provocative thoughts, you might say. But look, if you want to upset the apple cart, you got to upset the apple cart with ideas. They last longer than simply protesting. Oh, there's that word again. But simply saying you can't do something. No, what you have to do is you have to continue on a constant basis to be a thinker and to push the envelope so that others, their mind widens and they begin to take in thoughts. And the reality is, I know he was saying, some of these people will always think in a particular way. But here's a man who's spent his life trying to get everyone to understand a little bit more each day. And he's actually a great treasure. I kid with him hanging around forever. You saw at the end there, I love that. It's typical Arthur Laffer. He says, I hope you're around in 35 years because I intend to be here. I don't want someone else to do that interview. So that's that. Think about all of that. Now, in general, I wanted to close with where the Democrat Party is because when I opened it, I talked about a little bit about it, but we're in this interesting part with the Democrats in this party of protests. And, they were the party of protests in the 60s, and that didn't work out. So, how do they get out of being the party of protests? You know, uh, you don't have to ask me about it. You have to, if you look at whether it's Bill Maher, to think about what he has said, how they have to get out from some of the things that they're saying and all of the wokeness. James Carville says, why don't you just go off and form your socialist party? Which, by the way, AOC, I think, wants to be the Democrat Socialist Party. But if they do split, um, the history of the United States, excuse me, as I cover in my two books above, has never been a country where there have been minor parties or minority parties like you have in Germany or France or in England. We have been the two-party system country. And so the Democrats, if they can't emerge out of this and they wind up splitting, that won't be good. This is why the Democrats, by the way, often want the Republicans to split up to a conservative party and a Republican party, or split in any way they can, because that will make it easier for the Democrats. But as you saw in California, they don't have solutions. You have Gavin Newsom blaming Trump, and you had the media saying things like it was just people having fun watching cars burn, which is the media statement of the year, which leads me into where I want to wrap with this today, the state of the media. I was actually kind of shocked. I mean, I'm in the media, am I not? I've been doing last year I did over 600 radio and TV shows around the world. You can hear me on the London Times Radio in London and Sky News in Arabia, in addition to KUSI in California and other outlets. But I was really kind of surprised that the media was willing to go back to mostly peaceful protests, because they have been taking it on the nose. You saw the ABC reporter Moran go after Trump. The media too is in a free fall, and them returning to the same things that got them in trouble, or don't believe what our eyes are saying. I mean, even the New York Times was saying that as well. Don't believe your lying eyes. Pretty remarkable. So the California thing came at a horrible moment for the Democrats, because just when the Bill Mahers and the James Carvilles of the world and the Doug Schoens are saying they have to get into the solution portion of the cycle, they seem to go back deeper into denying reality and siding with people burning cars. And if they continue to do that, their party's going to burn down, at least for the next two cycles, because Americans, there was an overwhelming poll that Americans did not like what was going on in LA. And they're not against Trump and wanting to restore order. And for the Gavin Newsoms of the world to say, "Oh, we would have handled this if Trump hadn't have done this. He created a mess." That's pretty ridiculous. But that's where they are, and they're still stuck in their the age of protests, the Democrats' age of protests. Anyway, that's enough for this week. I'm Tom Del Beccaro. We will see you next time. Don't forget to watch us on YouTube, Rumble. You can pick up all of these shows on AUN TV and the links to all of them at politicalvanguard.com, our perspective, and we will see you next week.